Good afternoon, Mr. Smith.
Good afternoon, Mr. Robinson.
What are we podcasting about this afternoon?
Today, we have the privilege of speaking with Mr. Jonathan McNair, who is running Living Education Charlotte right here under our own noses. Did you know there's an education system going on right under our noses, Mr. Robinson?
I was aware of it.
How about a hello there, Mr. McNair?
Well, hello there. Good to be with you.
Thank you. All right, y'all stay tuned. Thank you again, Jake and Julia, for the music. And by the way, I hope that our sound is all right today. We continue to kind of upgrade, but it's sort of like an upgrade and a half. I'm using a microphone that has been in the Living Church of God since the days we were headquartered in California. I think Fred Flintstone used to run the actual sound system for us.
I think that's at least 15 years ago, isn't it?
It's quite some time. Yeah, I think so. So we hope you're rooting for us. We really have been working on making the sound better. I think the last podcast, it sounded a lot better, but this is a little more complicated setup because we have 3 microphones instead of 2. And the reason we have that third microphone is because we have Mr. Jonathan McNair here. Hello, Mr. McNair.
Hello.
You know, I have had the privilege of working with Mr. McNair for a long time. He was at my very first ministerial conference. Sat a little bit in front of me, had his Microsoft Outlook something going on, showing me how he organizes contacts coming in from various individuals contacting the church. And Mr. McNair, I want to tell you today, I didn't use any of that good advice that you gave me. I didn't use a single bit of it, but it did inspire me to try to look into other things. But, Mr. McNair and I have had the opportunity to work together at the teen camp, and he came and helped me out a lot with the preteen camps in Missouri that I was running for the church, and just a great source of insight. I appreciate that very much. And Mr. Robinson, y'all actually haven't had the opportunity to work as much together, have you?
No, we were talking about it before the show, and we just, for whatever reason, we have not ever overlapped at camps. I don't think ever until last year.
I was wondering when I came in who this person is that you had in the room with you, and I'm glad you introduced him because otherwise I'd be still confused.
Bring in a random hobo every week.
Oh, they've been in the back.
Well, I have seen him walking around the building here. We bump into each other, and I just sort of shy away, wondering who this person is and when I'm going to have a chance to have a podcast so we can actually be able to talk. So this is perfect.
Well, I was genuinely excited about having you on the podcast, and because I wanted to, you've been working with the youth and the youth programs for years, decades, I'm sure, and I wanted to get a little background on you and find out where you started working with the youth programs, how young you were, what your experience is, and what's led to where you are right now.
Sure. Well, I had the opportunity to go to camp when I was 16. That was SEP up in Ora, Minnesota. And that was a great introduction to the camp program. I really enjoyed that. I had an opportunity that's a bit of a tangent from that, but it was working with youth when I went to Thailand. So when I was after my sophomore year in college, I went to Thailand. I taught teenage boys English, and that's really where I would say that I began to learn about teaching and understanding working with young people because it was a different scenario from the church, and it's challenging because you're working with teenagers. In this case, teenagers from a different culture. So believe it or not, I might talk about camp, but a lot of the things that I've learned in working with students, and I'll go back to when I worked with students in Thailand. So long story short, I spent another 6 years. I spent 7 years altogether working in Thailand. And my job was actually to work with ambassador college students. I had to help them to learn to be better teachers, work with liaison with the schools where we were teaching, build programs to train them, to take them all over the country to help them to understand the culture. So really that's actually before even I got more involved with camps. That was a real help in just trying to figure out ways to design programs to teach and help young people in particular. And in between that, I did have opportunities to go to camp. I served as a counselor, and so I had opportunities to go to camp. While we were in Thailand, I went to the Philippines, worked at the camp there. When I was in college, I also went to New Zealand, did the SEP on Wheels, the 500-mile bike trip that we had in New Zealand.
I've never even heard of that. The SEP on Wheels.
We had, believe it or not, camp. We had a program twice to do a bike trip across New Zealand. I went on the second one, 500-mile bike trip. It was awesome. But that, plus I went to Australia 1 year, served as a counselor down there. So I had a lot of intermix within, let's say, Thailand, different things like that. And that's really what I think got me started in camp.
Was there anybody that you consider a mentor or somebody who made a significant impact on you that shaped your view of what it takes to train young men and work with the youth and bring them along and encourage them as they approach
As they're
adulthood,
growing into the
as they're
people they
growing,
want to
yep,
be.
yep.
One person who made a big impact on me, even though I only worked for him 1 year, was someone that Mr. Weston talks about sometimes, Dr. Nelson.
I have heard that name a lot, but I never had the
He taught
opportunity
me how
to
to
see
play
him.
basketball.
Really?
Pee-wee basketball. We were living in Tyler, actually, but we would go into Big Sandy, and that's where I got to know him. Really,
No
he was
kidding.
fantastic.
He was such an unusual person. When you look at him, he didn't look, I'll say, impressive as some sort of a specimen, as a sports coach or something like that. He reminded me, believe it or not, of my grandmother. Now that sounds crazy because you
That's
think
an
of man.
amazing endorsement. I can truly see how he'd be an influence to men everywhere. No, please expand on that.
When he talked, he reminded me of the way my grandmother would talk. He was like a grandfather type figure, and he was some of the principles that he taught. Even though, like I said, I only worked 1 summer for him as a counselor at SEP Orr. I learned a lot of valuable principles that they just keep hanging around and bumping around in my brain over the years, and I've had a chance to try to put them into practice and see. Sometimes, I think I've done okay at it. Other times, I've realized, okay, that I need to figure out how to do that better because he did it well. So I would say he's one, and the other. Again, I'm not to be a what can you call it, a boot polisher or something, but honestly, Mr. Weston, I worked for many years with him and learned a lot from him and appreciated his mentorship. So I would say probably he would be secondary.
If I can throw in there in terms of my experience working with y'all at the camp in Michigan, but then also at the preteen camp when you come by, one of the things that I've appreciated about, actually I didn't get to work with Mr. Nelson, but with you and Mr. Weston, was a sense y'all never, that's going to sound maybe bad, but it's not, I don't think, you seem to never feel truly satisfied. That is, you never seem to focus on patting yourself on the back that, oh, we've mastered all of this. We know exactly how to run a camp, it's perfected. No, you're always sort of evaluating. And I remember running the Missouri camp, the preteen camp. It was an influence on me where I never really felt the opportunity to, oh, good, I can finally rest on my laurels because it's all done. It seems like there's always, the things that we're trying to do are so important with the program that there's always things you can examine because they can be done a little bit better. And it's interesting what you said about Mr. Nelson, in that there's some standards there that you never really feel that you've completely mastered, but you're always wanting to do better. And I really appreciate that.
One thing I think is really important, and that is that because kids are different, you have things are changing in society, but I think that you can never be have the mindset that this is the way we used to do it, so this is what we're going to do now because this is the way we've always done it. And I think some might even wonder now, as we've had a bit of a change in camp, anything that we do, is it just because that's the way you guys used to do it? And that's not the case at all. In other words, that should not be the rationale. We're doing this because this is the way we've always done it. Now that doesn't mean you can't have principles and values that stand the test of time, but how they're implemented and how you really get the best out of kids and staff and all that. It's based on, I think, constantly reassessing based on values. So I think that's really important. I appreciate you saying that. That means a lot.
Well, thanks. That might actually be a good way to launch into living education, because it sounds like what you're saying, that circumstances do change. The world now is not the way the world was 10 years ago. It's not the way the world was 10 years before that, et cetera. But the values, God's values, and what he longs to bring out of the lives of his people and to instill within them, those things remain the same. And I would imagine that plays a large part in terms of living education Charlotte. One thing might be good to mention to the folks listening, is we hear living education a lot, and people know there's online living education. Maybe explaining the difference between living education Charlotte versus living education, what they experience online.
Sure. And of course, Living University lasted for 11 years, and we had a program that was basically an online program. And the students who came here to Charlotte did the online program with the adjunct of some conversation, some classroom experience. But by and large, it was the online program first, and then anything live was second. And after that experience and trying to reshape what we're doing today based upon the needs of the church, really, needs of our young people, needs of our membership, we established two really separate programs. And the online program is truly online and is geared, it's designed for those who can't be here. And but we said also those who come here, the young adults, and Mr. Wesson felt it was important, and I believe that's the way we should do it. I think we're in harmony. I think even across the leadership, we recognize that going forward, we need a cadre of young people who will carry the torch into the next generation. It's critical. But we needed to be able to have an experience for young adults that was face-to-face in the classroom, mentorship, not online plus. And so that's the way the program was designed. And that's why one of the reasons why we have it as a 9-month program. Because we recognize that in this day and age, we can't provide all the technical education that young people need in order to have a job, provide for a family, et cetera, et cetera.
It was costly as well.
It was, yeah. And so we're able to do something a little bit different by having a 9-month program. It's modeled on a gap year program, which is actually very popular today
you might explain that. I have heard about gap years. In fact, I think it's increasingly talked about in the news. Could you explain that though? Because I want to make sure I'm clear on it too.
Sure. And then ours is I say a modified gap year program, because gap year, strictly speaking, is a year in between your other years at college. So in essence, I took a gap year by going to Thailand between my sophomore and junior years. That's typically what's thought of as a gap year program. And as I said, it's really popular because a lot of the big schools, I saw an article, I think about Harvard or somebody, where they are encouraging a gap year as a means to refresh students, get them almost like maybe like a mission trip scenario where they're learning abroad. It helps to make them broader students.
Yeah, more well-rounded.
Exactly. And so we're taking that, but we're actually adding either before or after as well, because yes, it would work for students who are in the middle of their education, but it also could work before or after. And we've had students who are at all those places.
So like students, say, right after high school, but before they pursue any additional education or training, some who are in the middle, perhaps, of a college experience, say, or those who have just completed that and coming afterwards. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. I would say that the majority of the students who have come here are between high school and college. Not all, probably half. And the others, I would say, are those who are either in between their college or after the college, even some it's a few years after. But I would mention this because I've talked with some parents who are concerned that if their kids come here, I say kids, their young adults come here.
Yeah, my oldest is 25 now, and I still say kids.
I honestly think once you've personally crossed over 50, you can call anybody kids.
Well, I've wondered, is there a term like my adult kids? I mean, can you say that?
I do. I sometimes say that actually.
Yeah, we don't talk about, if you're talking about kid as a goat, you don't say, oh, the oldest kid out there, and it's but. Perhaps we should move on. You were talking about parents, some concerns some parents may have.
Well, one thing is that for a lot of kids today, they're able to take advanced classes in high school. It's not unusual to have kids come out of high school with some college credit, even AP classes, etc. So I guess one thing I would encourage parents to think about is that, look, don't be in a hurry. In other words, to come to a program where they're able to take another year of maturing. It helps to solidify not only their biblical values, which is really fundamental for us, but it also helps them to become a little more mature so that if they are going on to college, they have reinforced and they've built not just their biblical values, but also their ability to see the world around them and be able to assess what's happening around them and take care of themselves in a way that is, 1 year when you're 18, 19, 20 you can learn a lot. Yeah. So I think it's helped our students prepare for what's coming after. There are some challenges because I think that for some, in some certain states, if you go directly from high school into college, you can get free ride, scholarships to state schools, this type of thing. So I recognize that's the case. And some of our young people, they want to go into the hard technical fields. So for them to say, well, I'm going to go study the Bible, I'm going to work on my soft skills for a year, it's a waste of time. It's not a waste of time. Speaking, writing, maturing, these are powerful parts of an experience. They're really good for young people.
Right, and I know some colleges, I'm not sure how many all today, our kids have been generally taking community college classes. One of them had a vocation, wanted to go into electrical wiring, so didn't pursue another education after that. In fact, he's teaching there now. The other two so far that have gone through, they do have aspirations that do involve those kinds of classes. But a lot of, it's my understanding, colleges out there sometimes require freshmen to stay on campus. I know when I went to Texas A&M, I think it was a requirement. They didn't want you off campus unless you were an upperclassman. And for me, at 18, I was under my parents' roof, and suddenly I was on my own, and I'm completely responsible for myself with no form of supervision at all. And I don't want to go into a whole lot of details. This isn't some sort of weird confession program, but I would just say I had a lot of hard lessons to learn, really about myself, about that circumstance, that honestly I think another year would have been helpful, let alone with everything that's out there today.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so what would you say to kids who are out there thinking, okay, I could see this, maybe a gap year is a good idea, or parents? LE, what would you say, like a kid's gone through the program, they've graduated on the other side, what do you hope was achieved in their life or that they've accomplished, and that you've already hit some of this, that they're just more prepared in general and understand the Bible better, but like more specifically, like when you set up LE, your primary goal was what, and you what were you trying to accomplish so that it's the parents especially understand what you're trying to achieve with the program?
So let me reiterate that fundamentally the biggest part of the first thing is to establish a godly foundation, a biblical foundation for life. Our kids today, they're challenged on every front about even the Bible being even applicable to life or for real. So what we're able to do with our core classes, which are, one is a survey of the Bible as a whole. This is the Bible. Even kids growing up in the church, just because they sit in services and even hear from their parents about the Bible and so on, doesn't mean there aren't holes, there aren't gaps in their understanding, and there aren't questions that they have that are growing. So the first thing is to be able to understand the Bible as a whole. And Mr. Frank teaches that class. And then we have a doctrines class that goes over the basic doctrines. And then we have the Christian living, marriage and the family class. It's really more of a Christian living application of the Bible and life. So that core, that is preeminent. We have other classes that work on writing and work on even music, understanding music, different things that are brought in the mix. But that is first. But along with that is being able to, by living with other people, other young adults, guys and girls, the guys in one dorm or house and the girls in the other.
That's important. They're in two different houses.
I want to clarify that. But they actually have to put what they learn into practice every day, because after a couple of 3 weeks, the honeymoon is over. Your buddy or someone you think, oh, this is a wonderful person. Now you got to deal with them every single day and their idiosyncrasies. So in a sense, it's almost like a workshop that where they learn about the biblical principles, but they also have to. I mean, they have to learn to put them into place. And what happens is it takes a while. And over the course of the year, you have some rough edges. So there's that part as well. So it's for an 18-year-old kid, an 18 or 19-year-old young adult who is growing and maturing. It's a powerful experience that helps them. In a way, it helps them even with marriage, frankly, because they learn to live with other people.
Well, that's it's funny you said that. Like after 3 weeks, the honeymoon's over. I thought, well, that sounds a little like marriage, actually. But it takes a little longer than 3 weeks with the marriage. But you said a couple things that really, really resonated with me because I as we've talked about on the podcast a number of times, I grew up in the church, and two things. One, I was surprised when I was 18 how little I actually knew about the Bible, though we always there at services. I mean, we were never in and out of the church. I mean, always there every Sabbath hearing the messages. But the other thing was how intimidating the Bible is when you actually approach it. And so I love it that you try to break it down for them and give them an overview of the Bible. I think that's absolutely critical. You've got to break it down into manageable chunks to start to understand the Bible, because otherwise it's just overwhelming.
What we do is even at the end of the year, they have more and more situations where they have to practice defending their faith. So they've got to stand up and explain a doctrine or something, but we don't take them to that point unprepared. So the year is about building the ability so they learn how to answer those questions, as opposed to just being put on the spot where they feel intimidated or feel awkward or feel humiliated. We bring them to the point where they truly can defend their faith, and I think that's
interesting.
Helpful for years to come.
So you're saying you actually have that as part of the program, that later on in the year they're actually kind of put on the spot, but they've been prepared for that, but they're sort of put on the spot. Wow, that's fantastic. I actually didn't know that.
Part of the final for Mr. Tomac, for example, is doing just that.
Really?
For the doctrines class, where they have to pick a doctrine or a question from a doctrine out of the hat, basically, and be able to answer that one. They have to answer all of the particular questions, but they've got to stand up in front of the class, and whichever one they choose, they've got to go ahead and address.
That's great. I've thought about doing sometime at camp in the future one of those things, like won't give advertising to people doing things outside of what we do, but so this idea of having sitting down and inviting a dorm to come up and take turns and saying, well, I think you should go to church on Sunday. Change my mind, and giving them the opportunity to try to actually explain something like that. That's wonderful. I can attest. I work right next to where you guys have classes here at the Charlotte headquarters. I've never seen the kids coming out crying and in tears, so they clearly must have survived the experience.
Well, when you actually put it in a better way than I did. When I say when I was 18, I was surprised how little I knew about the Bible. That's not exactly the right way of putting it. How ill-equipped I was to defend the church's positions. I mean, I really do remember at work when I was in my 20s, the first time I ran into somebody that really challenged me on what's wrong with Sunday and the Sabbath, and I realized, for example, I didn't even understand what the arguments for Sunday even were. If you grow up keeping the Sabbath and the holy days, you just take it for granted that that's what you do, and your parents aren't, have taught you properly, and you run into people in the world that most of the people in the world who don't think that way, and I was at a loss to understand why they thought that way, but more importantly, how to explain to them why I thought the things I did. So that sounds wonderful.
And I would have to add, there's so much that society today that used to take for granted that is now flushing down the toilet, that I would say there's even more to defend, even just things that we used to take for granted that were just traditional understandings about gender and sexuality and right and wrong, that increasingly worldly Christian families, your local Baptist neighbors, et cetera, they're sending their kids off to college, and they're seeing their kids come back completely throwing away all of the beliefs that they were brought up to think. And next thing you know, it's a girl coming back home with a girlfriend, or if the girl even thinks she's a girl anymore. I think some of us do know individuals that have actually discovered their child has gotten caught up in this confusion. And I remember going to college, my first hippie teacher, if you will. This was in the late 80s, early 90s. It was a speech class, speech communication. And she sat up on the desk and crossed her legs and just wanted us to think of her as one of us. And even then I recognized, okay, she's got a sort of different approach to life. It was very interesting. But still, that was, again, late 80s. You're looking now at, how old am I now? You're looking at 30 to 40 years later, and it has just gotten worse. And I feel like a lot of us have probably seen elements in the news talking about the kinds of things they're trying to press upon children today. I know at least of one school, I believe it was in Texas, if you wanted to go to medical school, you needed this one teacher's recommendation. He was the only teacher at that major university whose recommendation medical schools would look for, and he required every student to say they believe in evolution, not just that they understand it, but they have accepted it and they believe it to be true, and he would not give you an advice. And that itself was actually 20 to 30 years ago. We're seeing worldviews being pressed on our own children that we're sending to schools today. And I imagine that's part of the goals of living education, which I think you've already alluded to, is to equip our children to truly understand the worldview the Bible offers them and to be able to defend that. And surely you probably have some of what they're facing in mind as you do that, I would think.
Yeah, definitely. Because I guess maybe I could explain it this way. It's one thing to be exposed to the truth growing up. And we can, our kids, they're exposed. They're sponges, and they soak a lot of that up.
It becomes their culture, so to speak.
It does, and they become habituated to a lot of what we teach and do. They become habituated to the Sabbath. So they don't have a problem not eating a ham sandwich. They're habituated to not. But to be habituated to a way of life is very different from being able to defend it. And I think it's the difference between being able, for example, to answer a question when it's posed to you, why do you believe in God, versus which of these reasons is why you believe in God, A, B, C, or D. In other words, to select one of potential right answers is very different from being just hit with a question. And I guess my goal would be, as the students go through the year, they'll be able to answer the questions and they know the issues, as opposed to only being able to recognize out of potential right answers, recognize the right answer. Well, what if you don't have the right answer in front of you? Then what are you going to say? So that's what you're saying is very true. We want to be able to help them. And again, it's 9 months. We can. It doesn't mean that they can just from this point not read, study, search out the truth. But
they can't do all just 9 months of intense activity and Bible study and then never have to read the Bible again. That's not how it works.
It's not going to work that way. That being said, boy, it really I believe it can help them off to a good start. Truly.
We have a small article at the livingyouth.org website that Thomas White, who is a graduate of the LE program and a wonderful employee here in the editorial department. I think I've referred to it before. I think it's called it's not God's Intimidating Book, but it's something like that. How he remembered the first time that his mother said that she didn't understand something in the Bible. And he said, well, how is that possible? But he said, you start to learn the Bible is a complicated book. That's what it's called, God's complicated book. And how it's okay you don't have to feel bad that you think it's a complicated book. It is a complicated book, but you just learn to grow into it and embrace that. And I feel like that's one of the benefits of LE is that a lot of our children growing up in the church, they see us wanting to study the Bible, and maybe we show them some of that, but still, how do you make that yours? How do you create in your own life a pattern of studying the Bible, and how do you approach it? And it can be so intimidating. And part of, I would suspect, the benefit of that 9 months is you have a chance to help them do that. So when they're leaving, it's not that they've mastered the Bible, because I don't think any of us here have truly mastered the Bible, but they feel more comfortable with it, that it is something they want to interact with. And speaking of that, actually, it launches one of the questions I did want to ask. Some might wonder, because it can be a black box, and one of the things I like being able to do when we speak or do something like this is kind of open up the black box so people are aware of what it's like. If you were a student, if I were to send I actually have a son coming, going to LE next year, and my oldest has already been through. But if you can kind of help some parents out there that are wondering, well, if I do send my son or daughter, what would a day of their life be like? What is it like for the children? Do they just sit there the whole time as y'all just kind of run through and rap them on the shoulders when they misquote one of the 10 Commandments? Or what is the daily life of a student at LE generally like?
Well, we begin our class day in the morning at 8:15. So they have to be up and getting their breakfast and doing everything. This is one of the other things, by the way, I'm going to sidestep for a moment.
Please do.
And the idea, the hope is that they learn actually to study their Bible, to pray as they begin the day. These things we encourage, we stress that, and if they're going to be successful, they need to develop good patterns and habits in their life. Not that everybody does. It's some of them have they may want to watch TV or play video games or different things, but we really lean on them to develop daily patterns of success. So That being said,
right.
we started at 8:15. From 8:15 to 8:25 is the morning motivation. And what we do in that morning motivation time is different things, but basically daily announcements. But we might do something like read a chapter of Proverbs. Sometimes it changes throughout the year. I have a schedule, but sometimes we'll watch an inspiring video. It may be on Fridays, for example, we watch Mr. Weston's weekly update. On Mondays, we watch the portion of the telecast. But the other days during the week, we do different things. It may be actually reading some poetry that's inspiring to me. So I may read a piece of poetry or something, or an inspiring story about a president, or it can be different things. But or a favorite section of the Bible, some Moses' speech to the Israelites, or something like that. So that's the morning. We start off with that, and then all morning long, then they have class. So it'll be. Sometimes we have study breaks in there, but we'll typically have an hour-long classes, and 8:30 to 9:30, etc., all the way through to 12:30. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, we have a forum and assembly. These are basically just hour-long sessions that can be on a variety of topics from a variety of different people. So that's thrown into the mix of their regular classes, the core classes, like I mentioned, and some other classes. So basically, the morning is classroom activity, and they'll be in different classes as if they would be in a high school or college. And the afternoon, then we switch gears. And the afternoon, they'll work in one of our work study programs. So that's why you had, for example, Thomas White working here in editorial here a few years ago, and then ultimately working here. Had Ryan Price working here in editorial. We have students that work in the maintenance area, or in the library, or doing video editing, or working in TV, different areas. But the afternoon then is dedicated to working. And the hope is that they'll also learn good work habits, because they'll be supervised by some of the folks here in the building who are getting things done. This is
Right.
They've got real work to do, and so they can earn some money working 20 hours part-time doing that in the afternoons. We have mixed into that in terms of what we do in activities and all that. We have mixed into that regular field trips. Every month we'll do a field trip. We'll go to some historical place, or maybe the NASCAR Hall of Fame, or we just came back from the Outer Banks, where we had an end of the year trip at the Outer Banks, which is a lot of fun. We begin with orientation, doing whitewater rafting. So there's a mix of activities and classes, but it becomes a routine, a daily routine of classes in the morning and afternoon work, and then in the evenings they've got to do homework.
Right. I've heard of the NASCAR trip. One day I got to go on the NASCAR trip. Everyone's comparing their times. I guess you're putting them in actual stock cars. No, we're not actually.
It is. It's stock cars have been taken off the track.
Oh,
and they're put
is
into
it?
They're put into this
Like a simulator?
A simulator. I mean, I love that, and I usually. Honestly, I have to tell you that usually I'm near the top. I may even beat the students, but it's a great experience. I'd love to talk all afternoon about just that.
About
alone.
just that,
that is fun.
I need to sign up for Ellie now, Mr. Robinson. Someone else is going to have to run editorial. I do like to hear about the trips, and actually, I would mention one of the neat things that y'all do that I like about the forums and assemblies is you do get speakers here at headquarters. You have these. The students able to hear regularly from guys like Mr. Weston, Mr. Ames, Mr. Mario Hernandez, some folks in different departments explaining behind the scenes how the work works. But also, y'all have done such a great job of bringing in people from other countries, people that serving in Australia and other places, to be able to actually video conference where they'll stay up at whatever weird hour they have to serve these students and give them that sort of international perspective. Literally had a NASA rocket scientist, right, come and talk to the kids about that. So it does seem like a really nice variety, the experience that you give them. And I would add, at least from what I've seen, part of the experience is the time they get with each other. Sure. Is all the time I'll hear about some of the kids getting together to go to dinner someplace, or some activity that they had a free Sunday and they all went and did together. A small little, cadre of friends you're getting to experience these things with together. And that's not something you can always program, but I would imagine that's something you're hoping that they get out of the program.
They really make lifelong friends and brothers, and I think that's a big part of it. Last couple of nights, of course, we were together at Outer Banks, and it's a bit emotional, frankly, because they've grown close and they pick on each other. You know, they'll tease each other. They had one for dinner a couple nights ago. They had. Well, they broke into this thing where they began imitating each other over the course of the year. They've and they would imitate one by one. They'd say, "Okay, we're going to imitate so and so," and everybody, and they had a lot of fun. But I think they did it in a way that was fun and not mean, you know, because they're learning to love each other, and I think that's so important because not every young person in the church has a cadre like that they naturally fall into. The ones who are here, they would not necessarily be natural friends with the others unless they were stuck together for this time. So I think that's really a big part of what benefits them as they're here.
Just so you know, I don't want to, and everyone should know, we did our best to try to coordinate this whole discussion and give Mr. McNair some questions that we had tried to, but things have been so busy. They've got graduation tomorrow, everything's going on. He's just been off the cuff this whole time. So just so you know, we're kind of springing a lot on him. In a moment, I'm just going to ask you for the opportunity if there's anything that you'd like to say that you haven't. But before that, Mr. Robinson, is there anything else you can think of we wanted to discuss?
Not a whole lot, and this might actually segue into anything that Mr. McNair has left. But my final question was just, what are your hopes for the program long term and its future?
Yeah, that and anything else you'd like to add. We'd love that.
One thing that we're starting next year, it's a brand new thing, is a student leader program. So one of the challenges that we've had is every year we have a new group of students, and it's what we've missed is the continuity from one year to the next that you have in multiple year programs. So, like in Ambassador College, you know, you've got somebody who was there last year who can be a big brother, who can be it could be an RA or what have you, but knows the ropes so they can be able to help the others. Well, we've had new group every year, and it takes a while to get everybody on track, know what we expect, and so what we're doing this year is we're accepting 3 students for a second year. Now, I say second year, we're not developing it into a 2-year program at this point.
Okay.
It's a 1-year program. I want to emphasize that because for those that come 1 year and don't do the second year, it doesn't mean they failed. It means they've done the program.
Well, they get the whole program. They've done
right.
it. Okay.
However, that being said, in order to develop that continuity and even provide almost student officers or student leaders, which is what we're calling them, we're extending. We're having a second year for them. So we have 3 students we've accepted this year. We could accept 4 or 5 if depending upon how things went, but it just worked out for the 3. 2 of them will be RAs, a guy and a girl, and another girl who will be an assistant, a student leader. They will be student leaders, okay? They will be taking classes. We actually have new classes for them.
Oh, good.
Plus, they'll be involved in organizing student activities. They'll take on more responsibility in different ways. So that is, I'm really, really looking forward to seeing how that goes. This is a new thing, you know. Like you said, we're constantly trying to improve. I think it'll be really helpful, but they're guinea pigs right now. They are literally guinea pigs this year. So that's something very new, and I think that's going to help with the continuity going forward. So that's one thing I'd like to make sure is mentioned.
Yes, thank you.
Because that's something new. Most people don't know about that. We haven't talked about it a lot, but that's one thing. The other thing that I would like to say, and that's this: to ask about hopes and dreams or what have you. Obviously, we want to improve the program, so we're really doing the best we can at teaching and providing the program does all the things we want it to do. But here's my crazy hope and dream. Okay, you asked, so I'll give it to you, and that is this: I would love for every young person in the church to come through the program and spend a year. Now you might say, well, that's crazy. Every person, but think about it. Just think about it. Not that this is the end all. I understand that, and not that young people can't grow up in the church and they can't learn and they can't be pillars in the church. I'm not saying any of that.
Right.
That being said, just imagine if every kid in the church would have a year to establish the foundation for their life, to grow up a little bit. To develop friends that will be friends for life after having spent 9 months. It's not a long time, but just imagine what it would do for the fabric of the church, for all of our young people to have had that experience together and with others who they know have had it. I think it would be a real empowering element in the church today if we could do that. And I say that because I think some people look at living education as it's like, okay, maybe, oh yeah, that's an option to do it if you really think what, and if you want to, but it's like a faraway option. But I wish it could become something that is recognized by parents and young adults as it's, camp is only a couple of weeks. And I don't want to compare it too much to camp, but camp, a couple of weeks can change. Mm-hmm. Young people can learn and they grow and they develop the friends. Imagine what it would be like for 9 months of that. And anyway, so that's something, maybe it's a pipe dream, but I just think that that's my goal.
What I'm hearing you say is you want it to be mandatory.
No, that's the problem, is it mandatory? Yeah. I would say that it's part of the church culture that it's understood and expected that it's a normal
right. It's not some strange, unusual option, but rather that it's a default consideration that parents might consider. Even if they're not just asking, should we or shouldn't we, or can we, but how might we work this in? Where that's kind of a default thinking, seeing the benefits that are there.
Almost like camp. In other words, camp.
Almost
most
like
kids
camp.
in the church, you want to go to camp sometime as you're growing up. Almost like that, where it's something that you don't. It's not mandatory, but yet it's something that's a lot of kids in the church do. Put it that way.
Right.
I just think it'd be a really good thing. So
no, we're good.
Maybe that's because I believe in the program, and you can see that I do believe in what we're doing, and so that's why I say that. So.
And so much what you've said seemed to ring true with the things I hear Mr. Weston way back when he first started talking about what he wanted with a program like this. That seemed to ring true for that. I remember, as we're wrapping up, in Michigan, the last year we had the camp in Michigan, there was one thing, and I can't remember if it was you or Mr. Weston, but someone was emphasizing. The theme there was about carriers of the torch, or this idea that we're counting on you, this younger generation, to carry all these beautiful truths forward. And I can't remember who it was that said it, but the point was made, and we know that Christ promises us that the gates of Hades will never succeed against the church. It will never die. But why is that? Because each generation is willing to carry the torch. And in that sense, God's truth is really only one generation away, and every generation from disappearing. And of course, we know that it won't disappear. Why? Because we know there will be those that step up, and we're trying to equip that generation through things like this. Thank you so much, Mr. McNair. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate that. And tomorrow's graduation, so it's for another year. It's a wrap, and we get started looking towards next year. So.
All right, and thank you, Mr. Robinson, as always.
And it's good to get to know you.
Yeah. And just for the record, he did not say it was mandatory. I was just making a joke.